Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to Simplicity Zen. Our guest today is Ben Connelly. Ben is a Soto Zen priest in the Katagiri Roshi lineage. His teachings focus on liberation, racial justice, and climate justice. He's based at the Minnesota Zen Center, where you're a senior dharma teacher. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and he's author of 3 books that I know of, at least. One being Inside the Grass Hut, Mindfulness and Intimacy, and Vasubandhu's Yogacara, which is a book I was a big fan of and how I became aware of him. Thanks for being here today with us, Ben.
I'm so happy to be here. It's good to be sitting face to face with you.
Yeah. So could you, so generally with these, we talk a little bit about kind of autobiographical stuff before diving into the teachings. Do you mind talking a little bit about where you were born and maybe what your childhood was like, maybe touching upon stuff that maybe was a trigger for later Zen practice and so forth?
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Mhm.
Yeah, I grew up in predominantly in central Iowa, so in the middle of the United States in a small town.
Mhm.
It's a strange small town in that there's a college there, and so that attracted people from around the world. So there was I was around a lot of people who were involved in farming, agriculture, and then also around a lot of people who are very, very involved in intellectual pursuits,
Mhm.
and also very conservative people, and then very progressive people.
Mhm.
So that was just the milieu I grew up in, and yeah, it was pretty good. It's funny. I was raised atheist,
Mhm.
somewhere between sort of not very into religion and sometimes kind of like moderately hostile to religion.
This was
uh,
you or your whole family?
just my family and kind of a lot of the people that we hung around with, I would say.
Mhm.
So, but then it was also very, very religious people.
Mhm.
Heartland of the United States. There's a lot of very, very deeply religious Christian folks.
Mhm.
So anyway, yeah, that was cool. But I became interested in meditation and yoga.
Hey there, Ben.
Um, when I was like 12 to 13, learned to meditate just by reading it from a book.
Mhm.
And I thought that was really cool. And it was like, oh, I can, attain these really weird states of mind that I
Mhm.
liked. But then, unfortunately, I found drugs. And
Mhm.
the part of me, I think, that was interested in um, trying to explore uh, different ways of being in the world became
Mhm.
really absorbed in just sort of like being able to change how the world was to me by taking drugs. So
Mhm.
I became a drug addict, and it really just had a huge negative impact on my life.
Mhm.
Um, and then in my late 20s, I got sober from drug addiction, and that really is kind of that spiritual part of me kind of woke back up and
Mhm.
really became focused on a spirituality that was about being a part of communities where people were healing.
Mhm.
And so then, not long after I started, I met some Zen folks, and I was like, oh, this is a way of understanding what spirituality can be that really rings true to me. One of
Mhm.
my students said this really beautifully to me. They said, I hear things in Zen that I've never heard, I've never thought, but seem like what I already thought
Mhm.
anyway.
Yeah.
So there are things that are really challenging to my worldview, but there are many things that just deeply, deeply resonated with my values.
Mhm.
So that's just a little arc.
Yeah. The drug use, was it like pot and alcohol, or did you get into harder stuff like Coke, or I mean,
I
like
used
how
a
deep was the hole? You
I
know?
used a very wide variety of
Uh-huh.
drugs.
Uh-huh.
So, and I don't want to really dwell on it. The
Mhm.
reason I bring it up here is because it did have to do with the part of me that felt called to
Mhm.
heal. I thought,
Mhm.
oh, I have suffering. This will help me deal with it. Ultimately,
Mhm.
that didn't work out well.
Mhm.
It was an interest in kind of seeing the world through new ways, which drugs can enable you to do, but then they become kind of a trap.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of things about what spirituality can be that I just got really sidetracked as a person by
Mhm.
this thing that appeared to be meeting those needs.
Mhm. To dive into a little neurobiology there, in the last 5 or 6 years, and some people are not kind of into looking at practice from this perspective, but over the last 5 or 6 years, they've really done amazing research on kind of how the brain works and how it constructs the self and so forth. And, a lot of it is that, the default mode network kind of creates a narrative sense of self and so forth. And, and not coincidentally, both mindfulness meditation and drug use shuts down the default mode network, and so that kind of backs up kind of what you're saying. Obviously, with drugs, though, it comes roaring back with a vengeance worse than it was.
Yes.
And plus there's tons of other good reasons not to do lots of drugs. But I really think that, that neurobiological window into how the brain works really backs up what you're saying.
Yeah. Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
In doing these interviews, I've noticed a pattern where a lot of people, they kind of have what in Red's eye would maybe be described as a great doubt, and a lot of times it's like, life sucks and I don't want it to suck, or sometimes it's, why am I here? What is truth? And other people, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to die. My people in my family have died. What is, like, would you say any of those are applicable to you, or just not really, did you not really think about it that way? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I don't feel at this moment like a great way of tapping into the Rinzai Great Doubt model, even though I've read something about it. But I can say, speaking to your question, my being a part of Zen practice was entirely just motivated by being really, really unhappy and feeling like the way I was conducting my life was really harmful. Mm-hmm. So although I had already been out of active recovery from addiction for years, I also had substantial mental health problems. Mm-hmm. And so when I came to Zen practice, it was just like I was trying to find any possible means to not be feeling terrible and doing things that harmed the people around me. I was really unkind. And so yeah, it was just, it was very practical, just like, this sucks, is there something else I can do? And, the cool thing is people had modeled for me that it's like, well, if things aren't going well for you, you could try something out. Mm-hmm. And I found Zen practice to be really, really helpful pretty immediately. Sometimes it was very hard. So I had the kind of Zen practice where I would sit in the Zendo and just like cry and stuff. And it'd be like, go to my teacher and be like, is this okay? And he was like, well, it's probably not good to make a lot of noise about it, but yeah, this is just about being how you are. My teacher, Tim Burkett, was really affirming of making a space so that if you had a lot of emotional turmoil, you could access Zen practice in a way that was genuinely supportive. So it wasn't just like, you have to go into this, go into the fire. It was like, I remember one time I was like super motivated because I'd like gotten a taste of what meditation and commitment to momentary awareness, the kind of freedom it could bring. So then I was like, I'm going to do this all the time. But I had all this stuff rising up in my body and heart that was really painful. And so I was like talking to my teacher and I'm just like, oh, I'm just trying to be mindful every minute of the day, but it's so hard because I have so much rage and so much shame and it's super intense. And he was like, have you tried watching TV? He was just like, yeah, you don't have to like push yourself into every possible corner of what you are every minute. And so he was good at helping me kind of modulate, or titrate is the medical term, how I used the practice to heal. And it was really healing for me.
And so did you do the classical 12-step program?
Yes, I'm an extensive 12-step practitioner.
Yeah. And so one of the steps is, I guess, the higher power step. Am I characterizing that correctly?
Basically, the idea of a higher power being the thing which relieves you from your suffering is pervasive. It's like runs throughout the whole thing. Super.
Yeah. So prior to your exposure to Zen, how did you characterize that? Like, what was the framework you saw that within?
Yeah, that's a cool question. I would think for a lot of people interested in Zen or any kind of religiosity, how do we deal with these questions of higher power, what people
Mhm.
view as God? Having been raised atheist, like I really didn't like that it was like, I felt like I was in a position where my life depended on figuring out how to believe in something that I thought was stupid. It was tough. I mean, I can't even tell you. It was really hard. But what I can say is one of the things that I encountered early on, and this is before I encountered Zen, but there are people who are just like, I pray every day and it helps me a lot. And so I was like, well, back to my thing where I learned, people modeled how to just try stuff that would help. I was like,
Mhm.
okay, well, if that's working for you, I'll try it. And
Mhm.
so for years I prayed, and I prayed in a monotheistic way, like to a deity. And I
Mhm.
never believed in a deity. I just did the prayers
Mhm.
repeatedly every day for years.
Mhm.
And it's hard to know, what was causing the big changes in my life, but my life was changing a lot. I was
Mhm.
becoming more emotionally healthy and less driven by compulsion, and kinder to people.
Mhm.
There's a quotation from C.S. Lewis that says, "Prayer does not change God, prayer changes me." Well, since I didn't believe in God, I was just like, prayer changes me. That's simple.
Mhm.
I don't really know, all phenomena are empty, but it seems, practically speaking, to be effective. And so now I don't do those kind of prayers anymore, but I commit to Soto Zen ritual,
Mhm.
many times a week. I'm,
Mhm.
you know, making an avowal of karma, uh, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha,
Mhm.
um, intoning the Heart Sutra, which is really, in a sense, it's a magical incantation of
Mhm.
what going beyond our ideas can be. And then
Mhm.
I humbly put my head on the floor in order to just let that in. So
Mhm.
that prayerfulness as an activity is what makes sense to me. So, what's a higher power mean? It could mean a lot of things, but in a certain sense, it is evident that doing the things that are conducive to liberation leads to liberation.
Mhm.
And that's bigger
About
than me.
yeah,
That's bigger than me.
about the ritual. I was talking to one of my kind of Soto mentors, and we were talking about how a lot of times things like the Heart Sutra and identity of the Sandokai and stuff, how like they only kind of hit me when I'm doing them kind of ritualistic with a group. I mean, I probably read Sandokai 1,000 times, but sometimes when you're doing it with a group, like it can just seem so powerful in a way that just reading it can't. Do you have that experience at all with the ritual aspect?
Yeah, I've had my experience with the textual tradition of Zen is really various
Hmm.
personally. So definitely I've had those experiences. I mean, just this week, during a practice period, I had us do one of the rituals outside of the normal time we do it, just to hear all those voices and to feel
Hmm.
the bodies moving together. It's way beyond whatever the words are supposed to mean.
Hmm.
So this is one of the beautiful things about Zen. It's like it doesn't deny that meaning is there, and the ritual can mean something, but we don't have to find a meaning outside of just the experience of doing it right now. That
Hmm.
can be very, very complete.
Hmm.
And yeah, I can remember a moment where it's like there's a bell that struck before a particular line in the Song of the Grass of Hermitage. And I mean, it was just like, I just felt like my whole consciousness was exploding. But
Hmm.
having said that, I also have had deep, profound, transformative experiences from textual study,
Hmm.
where I'm just sitting. Right now, I'm looking at a text I'm working on, translating and writing a commentary on that I have on my wall. So it's above my desk. So every time I look up, I'm looking at this text, which is
Hmm.
210 Chinese characters.
Hmm.
And although we can experience it as not a meaning outside of whatever is happening right now, also there's meaning.
Hmm.
And some of the things that these Dharma teachings say they're really transformative and mind-blowing. And that's something that I really feel. And when I'm teaching, I'm trying to help people access all the different ways you can engage in the textual tradition. So for people who are really academically oriented, I'm pushing them to feel it as an embodied ritual activity. For people who are like, I don't want to try and figure out what this means, I'm like, well, why don't you do a little bit of that? So we can kind of have those all working together.
Are you familiar with the Korean master Chinol? I might be saying his name wrong.
Chinol, yes.
Yeah, and I recently was part of a book group that went through his stuff, and looking at his biography, every one of his kind of like major kind of transitions and practice all happened through some sort of textual study. They were awakenings of some sort, but they were all triggered by textual study, and then of course Hakuin, the Rinzai master who reinvigorated Rinzai. His decisive transition was reading the Lotus Sutra. So I mean, it's definitely good company.
Yeah, for being beyond words and letters, we're totally in them.
Yeah, I think I read once Zen has an order of magnitude more writing than any other type of Buddhism combined, or something like that.
Yeah, we're so funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you actually discover Zen? Did you see like a poster on a wall? Did you know someone that practiced it? Did the spirit come to you in a dream? Kind of what?
Yeah, I would say, practically speaking, I did have some friends who had practiced at the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. So I knew about it and knew they had valued it. And it's very close to where I live. I've lived in the same house for a long time, so I can walk to the place, and I could at that time. It's just the place I could walk to. And it turns out I just found really great relationships there. So I'm very fortunate. So yeah, I had an interest in meditation. I was like in this process of having a lot of turmoil in my life and trying to be well. I'd studied quite a few religions, so I read the Bible and I read some of the Quran. And when I read Zen literature, Buddhist literature in general, and Zen literature in particular, I felt a deep sense of resonance. So that all was there. But I rarely talk about this, but it is strange. I don't have a lot of strong memories of being young, unless some people seem to have more. But I distinctly remember someone joking about the sound of one hand clapping koan when I was like 8. Why did that stand out to me and stick in my memory? I don't know. And then there was a colleague of my parents who is a religion professor and a Holocaust survivor, a Jewish man who trained in Japan when I was a teenager, and I would hear a little bit about that, and that made a real impression on me. And he's an amazing, just a beautiful human being.
And so I think I'm a little less than 50. Are you around my age or?
Similar, yeah.
Yeah. So I've talked to a couple of people who are kind of from my generation, and how maybe Star Wars kind of set a template for, because like Yoda, the little master, let go of your thoughts.
Oh yeah.
Training. There's something binding everything. Like I really think that kind of impregnated my DNA with the awareness that type of thinking exists. Because I like you, I grew up totally atheist. Like I think I was 15 or 16 before I even knew Christmas had a religious component at all. I mean, like I was literally that atheist, And but what I really like looking back, and I think other people have seen it too, how like Star Wars is a mythology and a way of viewing the universe. I really wonder if I would have gotten into Zen without it, because it really did something to me internal. Does that resonate with you at all, or is that kind of just weird?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about it, but yeah, I've definitely thought about how Star Wars is like crypto Buddhism with a lot of Japanese, they wear Japanese looking robes, the people with the swords. So yeah, I mean, I haven't really thought about the relationship to my spiritual path, but it's probably in there. I thought Star Wars was really cool, and I still can, enjoy it.
So can you talk a little bit about, did you meet your teacher right away, or was he in charge was Katagiri still alive when you started practicing?
No. Katagiri Roshi died about 10 years before I got to Zen Center. And I didn't know it at the time, but my teacher, Tim Burkett, had just taken over from Karen Sunna.
Okay.
So he was there, yeah, and he was always there. Because he's a little bit older, he's not there for morning zazen now, but for many years he was there every morning zazen, and that's when I would go because that's what works for me. And so, yeah, I mean, we were just like sitting there. We didn't talk or anything. We just kind of moved around. And man, I just got to reflect since we're talking about it. Like the ritual part was so off-putting to me at first. Like I was like, this is weird and terrible. But I obviously come to enjoy it from the other remarks I've made. But anyway, so we would just do that. But then pretty quickly, he would offer Dokusan, and someone was like, hey, do you want to meet with Tim? And I was like, I'd been reading these books, where like these awesome Rinzai teachers were helping people shatter reality by eating them. And so I was like, wow. I mean, it's funny to look back at how the intensity with which I would go up, because he's, I still meet him with my whole heart, but he's just a person that I've lived with now for 20 years. So yeah, we would go up and have Dokusan, and he would give Dharma talks, and I thought they were really encouraging and helpful. He was pretty available. Yeah. I should say, you said was Katagiri there. Tomoe Katagiri was still teaching sewing there.
Okay.
She's still alive. She doesn't teach sewing anymore. And she was my teacher for sewing my robes for ordination. And she was a really inspiring figure.
She was pretty instrumental in bringing the tradition of sewing rakusus and robes to America, wasn't she? Do I understand that right?
Yes. I wrote an article about Tomoe for Tricycle that was really fun to write because I got to interview lots of people who knew her, and you just getting to hang out with these people who are just overwhelmed with stories of appreciation and love, it's a fun activity to be engaged in. Through that process, I mean, arguably, she was the first person to teach rakusu sewing in the United States. I have checked in with the folks at Zensuji, which is the first Zen temple in the U.S. that was formed 100 years ago, because we're in the 100th anniversary year. I went down there and met with the abbot, and as I recall, he was like, yeah, we weren't teaching Nyohoi sewing. But anyway, I'm getting way down a rabbit hole. The answer to your question is yes, she is really important to bringing that practice to the U.S.
It's such an important part of American Soto practice, where my understanding is outside of Uchiyama's lineage, it really doesn't happen in Japan. It's kind of something that kind of came through, and gained much more importance. And I think traditionally it was important, but then it kind of got to the point where there were official Soto tailors, and you go and you buy your stuff from them, and
yeah, I'm not sure why the Japanese priests who were transmitting to the U.S., a number of them seem to think it was really important, but it's clear that they did. And one of the things I like to do is just continually remember that if I'm sitting in the seat of a Soto Zen priest, and that's kind of where I'm speaking from, to just try and keep having some humility around my relationship to that tradition, particularly as a white person carrying the tradition forward from a tradition that's predominantly formed in Asia. Just trying to be just sensitive to that.
Could you what were your impressions of your teacher when you first met him? Were you blown away? Was it more mellow? Was there anything about his presence that grabbed you?
I think I was pretty blown away. Like, it was like the amount of projection. I was like, oh, this is like a Zen teacher with Dharma transmission. Oh my goodness. Because, now we have like lots of people at our Zen center with Dharma transmission, and I have Dharma transmission. So it's like, I mean, it matters and I value it, but it's just something, people do. To me, it was like, I was meeting someone from outer space. So I had a huge amount of projections, but things beyond my projections that really hold true is he is a person who really, really has a huge amount of energy for meeting people where they are and trying to support them. and has a tremendous creative spirit. So I'm really grateful, and he's been really supportive to me.
How soon did you transition from like I'm going to show up on Wednesday or whatever nights your guys' thing was and sit to kind of more serious in practice where you were sitting every day and committed and maybe starting to do some sesshin and so forth?
For me, it was a very steady, gradual progression. So it was like I started coming on Thursdays. That was pretty good. So then I was like, maybe I'll try. That was just early in the morning, just zazen and service. And then I don't know, a few months later, it was like, maybe I'll try going to a dharma talk. And I was like, oh, that's really helpful. And I like meeting people. And so I started doing that. And then I come a little bit more. And I was like, well, I'm doing this enough. Maybe I'll try a retreat. And a retreat, that seemed helpful. So, it's just like, just kept adding a little bit. So it's pretty gradual. And same thing for me, the path of taking the precepts and then ordination, where it was just kind of like, yep, this just seems like a good next step. That's
it was almost sneaking up on you in a way.
Yeah. Well, I actually wouldn't say that. It was deliberate. I do feel like I don't feel like I've been swept along. I mean, I have been, because that's how karma works. but my sense of agency within it has been quite clear that, like, I would like to do a little more of this. That just keeps happening. That's my problem. I keep thinking, this really seems helpful and something that I value and that maybe helps other people. So I want to do a little bit more. And that's still true. I mean, I've taken on things in the last few months. I'll just do a little bit more. Yeah.
Your first 7-day session, was that a nightmare for you, or did you have a kind of a good balance, a base by the time you got to that point?
I don't remember that well. It was very hard. Early retreats, I don't like to talk about this very much. They're very physically difficult, and we really are making efforts to, generally speaking, the part of sesshin being really physically hard and uncomfortable, I question quite a bit. But at the time, we were trying to be more to have that happen less for people and to make more space for people to take care of their bodies. But I was kind of like I was like, I'm gonna do this, so I was kind of putting myself in that box. So it was very physically difficult, and I remember that vividly. But I just remember, it felt like a deep and beautiful thing to just be that attuned to what was happening moment to moment, to be in my life. To just be seeing the leaves and the insects and feeling this body and feeling that was complete and enough was amazing.
Through all of your practice, so right now you're a Zen teacher, that's your profession, correct?
Yeah, I mostly, I do also do some secular mindfulness training, and I used to be a musician, so I still do a little bit of teaching.
Yeah, so that was kind of my question. So for a while you had a job and you were maintaining a practice. Did you ever have do you guys have residential practice there in Minnesota? Did you ever become a resident, or were you kind of always a householder, so to speak?
Always a householder, yeah. So we don't have residential training capacity here, and it's really interesting. Katagiri, he founded our Zen Center, which was like a temple-based practice, and he ordained and gave transmission to a lot of people, something like 15 people. And he did form a residential place, Hokyoji, which is still wonderful and operating. But most of the training people did was not at Hokyoji. So the training model he set up did not have a lot of residential stuff, although he would ask people to go do residential training. But it was actually and so my training has not been residential. And it's been very humbling when I started, I was just with my community doing the training we were doing for a long time. And then I started to travel a little bit more and try and go practice with other people. And I travel to teach quite a bit. And it was really humbling. I'd show up at places and it's like, I'm going to give a talk. And many of the people there had been in residence for longer than I had been practicing Zen. So it's very humbling. But I do think, you can cultivate what Zen is about in many different ways. And so I have a lot of humility and appreciation around people who devoted themselves to residential practice, but I haven't experienced it much.
Mm-hmm. Do you have kids, or did you get married, or did you have a
Yeah,
family?
I did all that stuff. Yeah, so I have, what the family tree is a bush kind of a thing. So I got married just a few years ago, like 5 years ago. So actually I met my wife the year that I was ordained.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so she likes to say, I thought I was marrying a musician and I ended up with clergy. Poor girl. Anyway, so we've been together for a long time. And we got married about 5 years ago. And between us, we have 5 kids in various configurations, uh, although we don't have any biological children. All our kids are adults. But I did, I think maybe hearing the drive of your interest and what you think people listening to this might be interested in. I was raising a child when I was doing Zen practice. I was a single parent with partial, just like my son on the weekends, because I had not been married before that. And there were times that it was hard. It was like, I do a lot of retreats. And so, but I was very fortunate in that my son's mother was very flexible, and then I would have him more and take care of him more when I was back. And I unquestionably think that it was better for our relationship because I did so much healing, and I've learned so much about how to try and be with people. Because I was not naturally all that great at it. I need a lot of help.
So you mentioned being a musician. Looking back at my early life, I think I see now that kind of my first experiences of samadhi and even maybe no mind were from music. Just kind of like that, being taken away by music or even playing it a little bit. And of course I got swept up in the Grateful Dead world, which was crazy. No mind, music. And so as a musician, did you see any intersection between practice and music? I don't want to get too much into mind states, but as far as samadhi or flow states and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people who are involved in the arts, like there's often been connections between arts and Zen, both, for a long time, hundreds of years. And as a musician, definitely flow states is one way that it's described. What my interest with this in talking about it, because I have not, for various reasons, have not been that interested in sort of integrating. I integrate Zen practice into my life as a musician because when I'm teaching students and I start to get like irritated or impatient, I can rely on my practice to realize how I feel and try and take care of it and try and find a way to relate to them that's kind and helpful. So that's where I'm at with it. But more to your question, what my book Mindfulness and Intimacy really talks about this, just recognizing that certain activities evoke mind states that we like, where we feel connection, and art practice can really do that. It's very common. People will talk about like, oh, I don't need to meditate because I can just like sit down and do my calligraphy or and one of my interests is helping people see that it's great if you find something where you can find a deeply connected, whole awareness of the moment kind of mind state. That's awesome. And then you want to see if there's ways to branch it out from the context where you feel it. So like if I only feel that when I'm sitting Zazen, it's cool, but I want to bring that to the next area, into the ritual, and then into my dialogue with people. And then likewise for people who can feel that through the arts, it's like, how can they begin to expand the ability to have that state of consciousness into other fields of their experience? Because if you don't, the problem is you can get really trapped in it. So that's very common. People who have an ability to have almost mystical, or you could call it mystical kind of frames of being, but they can only have it in this one place. And so the rest of their life looks so bereft.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who's gone to a session probably knows something about this. Like, you leave the session and you have that moment where it's just like you feel like you're being stabbed because you're falling back into your conditioned way of being, having experienced something so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, how can we make that flow more natural and be less painful and be able to get those states to be a little bit more harmonious? It's a real interest of mine.
Mm-hmm. You know, so I'm a software developer, and there's been times where I swear it's almost like I'm not programming. I'm almost like channeling it, and like it's even like I've looked back at like projects I've written. I'm like, how did I do that? I'm not that smart, you know. Like, I mean, I'm not being humble. I mean, I really have felt that. Like, where did that come from? Like, I don't know how to do that, you know. And it's like, but so I mean, clearly there's some like the self disappearing and kind of the universe doing the programming itself a little bit going on there.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, so that's, you know, clearly some you know, kind of no mind or samadhi type dynamics going on there, but it's not liberative, right? There's nothing about that experience that goes to the cessation of suffering. And I've often thought, like, well, what is the difference between Zazen and, you know, like the universe programming? Like, why is one helpful? Why not? And I really wonder, maybe the difference is the embodiment of Zazen, where it's, you know, you're kind of embodying the wisdom into your body. Like, does that make sense to you at all? Or kind of want to get your opinion on that theory?
Well, I'll take a different angle. I'm just kind of just coming up with something here, but you know, I'm not sure I agree that there's nothing. I think there probably is some element of liberation, of the path of liberation, that is in that moment where there's that dissolution of self. But it's not as complete as it could be. You're like, yeah, I can just tell. It's not like I'm. But those mind states, and like I say, that's kind of my argument, is those mind states do matter, and it's really cool to be like, oh, that was like really beautiful, and be like, that's a way mind can be. But you know, now I'll kind of move towards kind of a karma theory or a Yogacara perspective. Early Buddhism, and then as we get into Yogacara, the emphasis is basically we get a whole very complex philosophical structure whose purpose to say the intentionality of this moment is what is actually contributing to what will happen. And that's like, it's very weird, because I think like
that makes sense.
Physical object is what matters. But so it's a complicated philosophy that backs up that proposition. The reason for the proposition, I am getting to your question, is to remind us of our liberative power. So it's like to kind of bring us back. Oh, the way and the intentional manner in which I'm coming at this moment is what matters. So if we analyze from this perspective what you're talking about in that when you're coding, so the thing is, the parts of the experience that are this flow state are beautiful and liberative, but they're not connected, possibly. I don't really know your experience, but the way you're describing, they may not be very connected with the aspiration that what is happening here is for the liberation of all beings, which is another intentional component that makes it more contributing to liberation. And this is why when you go, you're just gonna have to live with me talking for a long time. So this is why when you go to a Zen temple, they have those gathas all over the place. So you're gonna wash your hands. You do your hand washing gatha about washing it for the liberation of all beings. So then you go, okay, well, what if I, as a person who writes code for a living, I know that I can experience these flow states, but it doesn't feel all that liberative. What if I just like sit down at my desk and I'd be like, I'm gonna write code for the liberation of all beings right now. Now, one part of you probably goes, well, that's just, how does that matter? This code is just going to make people sell widgets, or I don't know what you're doing. But if we keep doing it, it changes how we act. And that's liberative. So I would say there is something liberative going on, and you could probably heat that up just by bringing your vow into your place of work. The only problem is sometimes that's frustrating because you'd be like, I'm saying this vow, but it doesn't feel like I'm doing anything liberative. But that even that pain is helpful because then it helps you to orient your life. How can I make this actually honor my values more deeply?
Thank you. You know, the question of vow and aspiration and intention kind of leads me to kind of a thought experiment I've kind of had with myself, where let's say you took someone who's never heard of Buddhism, never has like literally never heard of Buddhism, doesn't know anything about spirituality or meditation or anything. And he said, okay, I'm going to pay you $1 million over this next 10 years. And every day I want you to sit down on this cushion. You know, at first I want you to follow your breaths. And then now I want you just to first count your breaths. And now a year later, I want you to follow your breaths. And a year later, I want you to kind of open your awareness more expansively. You know, I want you to, every time you're doing something, I want you to bring your attention to the physicality of the present. So you're having them doing all these practices. They're just doing the practices, and there's no philosophical framework around it. It's just, it's just the neurobiology of what they're doing. I've always wondered if, like, would that be better, or without the vow, do you not get the liberation? It's always been kind of an interesting thought experiment for myself. And it sounds like maybe with your idea about vow and intention, maybe you would lean a little bit towards that's the needed element in the recipe of practice.
It's a fun thought experiment. I've never thought of that. I think they're probably, I think anyone who just had more mindfulness of body. I mean, anyone's a lofty claim because people's relationships to their bodies are complex. But I think generally speaking, that person would probably be a little bit happier and promote happiness around them a little bit more. It's kind of there's a lot of different elements to what practice is. And this is the thing that's a little bit strange when we use the term intentionality in a Buddhist context, talking about karma. It doesn't just mean like conscious intention. It basically means all the stuff that's happening that you think of that would normally be considered like you, all that stuff that causes you to do things, all the stuff. So the thing is, in that case, if the intentionality is like, I want my $1 million, well, that's planting seeds of greed, right? But you can be planting, there's a lot of seeds, like from a Yogacara descriptive process, there are millions of seeds bearing fruit in any second. So there's some seeds of greed when you're sitting there, but there's also seeds of mindfulness of body, which is helpful. So this like gives you an analysis. That's one of the things I like about Yogacara. It kind of gives you analysis of like, oh, these elements seem to be more helpful, these less helpful. But I think bringing in the vow too is probably a good idea.
Thanks. So you're practicing with your teacher, you're getting more and more engaged. You had Jukai. At any point, did you have aspiration to be a teacher, or were you just more focused on what is Zen doing for my life? How is it making me a better person? At what point did it broach like, oh, I might be a teacher in this tradition? Was that something pretty early, or not until your teacher kind of broached it, or how did that unfold for you?
Yeah, I think it was just like a steady progression. So one thing is, you might guess just from the way I talk, I'm sort of an irrepressible communicator, and I was like a professional creative class person, so I like to make stuff up. So it was a little bit hard for me to I really thought it was important to be quiet and not dominate discussions for lots of reasons. One, I was new to the tradition, and two, being white and male, I have a lot of training to make sure you don't take up too much space, because that's a oppressive tendencies that I'm going to be conditioned to have. So, but I was just like, I want to say stuff. So I'll be like, what is the most terse way I can let this out? So when I was just a few years into practice, I would when it was Q&A time or sharing, I would write these little 4-line poems and share them with people. And no one seemed to mind that because it didn't take up a lot of room. So that was a way of me just I want to talk about this practice. It's so beautiful to me. But I also know that I'm pretty new to it, so I have some humility, and I don't want to dominate things. But I just want to speak.
Mhm.
And that way of engaging it was sort of affirmed by the community, so it felt okay.
Mhm.
But what I'm getting at is there was something about just wanting to express how
Mhm.
beautiful and transformative this was for me,
Mhm.
which has been the predominant underlying driver of my interest in teaching.
Mhm.
But then, yeah, I think I got asked to teach Introduction to Meditation, and that was just it's just, frankly, it's just fun. It's amazing to just see people having those experiences and be able to talk to them about it. So I was
Mhm.
like, oh, I am currently teaching and it's enjoyable. And I
Mhm.
also, like, I come from a family of teachers. And so, yeah, at some point I was like, oh, was like, oh, we need someone to teach this class. Would you do it? I was like, yeah, sure. But what I want to say about this, so like the activity of teaching sort of naturally emerged as a progression from my interest in expressing what I found to be the beauty of the tradition. And that has
Mhm.
been really true.
Mhm.
But I do remember a moment that runs slightly counter to that, which is I was standing in front of our Zen center and I had been ordained fairly recently. And
Mhm.
maybe I was wearing robes or something. And one of my yoga teachers from elsewhere was walking down the street. And he was like, oh, we were talking for a minute. And he's just kind of looking at me because, I'm wearing funny clothes. I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, yeah, I'm a priest in training here at this Zen center. And he's like,
Mhm.
wow, cool. And he's like, how long is your training for? And I was so flummoxed by that question. I still remember the embodied feeling of just like, I had never thought of it that way before right now. And
Help us.
it was like my teacher often gives people transmission after 7 years, but I just was not thinking about that at all.
Mhm.
Um, but here's the appendage to the story is once I started thinking about it, then I was like, oh geez, when will I get transmission? So yeah, those are just some things about that progression for me.
Mhm. Did you get ordained first, or do you guys have Shusho ceremony and like head practice, head student type of thing during an ongo, or is that a thing for you guys?
Our sequence of like sort of rites of passage
Hmm.
is we have what we call initiation, which is
Hmm.
usually often called jukai.
Hmm.
And then we have ordination, which is sometimes called home leaving, and that's where you're ordained as a priest in training.
Hmm.
And then if your training is going well, oftentimes after 3 or 4 years, there'll be a shuso ceremony where you
Hmm.
go practice period.
Hmm.
And then oftentimes 3 or 4 years later, people will receive transmission. But of course, people don't complete their training with some frequency, because they choose not to, or the relationship with the teacher decides that is not appropriate. And that can be really hard. It's really important to just acknowledge that within a lineal transmission system like Soto Zen, teachers have a lot of power,
Hmm.
and it's really important to acknowledge it because
Hmm.
it's very hard. I've seen many people whose relationships with their teachers fractured after ordination, and
Hmm.
people suffer a lot. And so
Yeah.
that's part of the deal.
Hmm. So it's not like San Francisco Zen Center ecosystem where you can do Shusho as a layperson, and your tradition is for monks only.
I've never seen that happen.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, when you did your Shusha, was there any sense of kind of imposter syndrome, or were you just like, this is great, I can finally talk about it and not feel guilty?
It's weird. No, I don't. I do not. When it comes to teaching, I have probably an excess of confidence. My problem
Okay.
is more not having enough.
Hmm.
Uh, I just love, I love things. I just trust that talking about things is beautiful and I just go for it. So yeah, I've had other impediments, shame related impediments that probably have some like familial relationship to imposter syndrome. But no, when Shuso ceremony came out, I was just like, this is going to be really fun.
Hmm.
I love Shuso ceremonies because they're dialogic and improvisational.
Hmm.
Dialogue and improvisation are things that I just love. I love
Hmm.
teaching as facilitation is really fun.
Hmm.
So it was, I mean, I was like nervous and stuff, but I was
Hmm.
more nervous about like using implement
Stick that.
correctly.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's different. You know, some people it's really, really hard to get up and teach in front of people.
Mhm.
People are different. You know,
Mhm.
for me, if you ask me to like change the oil on your car, you know, oh my God, I'm gonna have a breakdown. Other people think that's easy.
Mhm.
So it's really important to acknowledge all the different capacities and in general, but you know, in Zen communities, to realize that we're culturally different, we have different personal predilections, and I
Mhm.
would love to see more and more a culture where it's like all different ways of engaging the Dharma are valued. Um, yeah,
Mhm. So you're, um, I can't remember your position, but you're involved with the Soto Zen Buddhist Association, correct?
correct.
What is your role there?
I am the interim president.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, so
And
that's good. I stepped in to hold that position for a while, and it's been good. Yeah, I would say Soto Zen Buddhist Association is a professional association of about 250 Soto Zen priests,
Mhm.
and it's been really, you know, I've been a little bit involved, but it's been really fun to just learn about what all different kinds of people are doing. You know, people
Mhm.
volunteer a lot of effort, and the main thing, my main interest in the Soto Zen Buddhist Association is that connection is really important.
Mhm.
So to have healthy Buddhist communities requires connection. You know, we see many different kinds of ethical violations by teachers harming their
Mhm.
students,
Mhm.
sexual abuse of power, financial abuse, and just, you know, kind of dominating people. And that is much more likely to happen when people are kind of like in their own little realms without connection. So,
Mhm.
building networks of peer support, communication, that's a really important antidote to that. Also, we can just share ideas and make a more healthy thing where people around the
Mhm.
country could move between places more naturally. That's
Mhm.
beautiful. So, and also it is, I have a particular interest in using my position there to create more equitable access to power because Soto Zen Buddhist priests in the United States are very predominantly white and
Mhm.
disproportionately white.
Mhm.
Um, and so, and you know, there's all kinds of other sort of oppressive structures that live in our culture. And so by
Mhm.
having people together, we have an opportunity to talk about that together and do something that can make a change and make a more
Mhm.
inclusive and healthy and equitable Soto Zen.
Mhm. Yeah, kind of on that topic, one thing I've noticed is, I've heard some people joke about how, Mahayana, or I guess Buddhism in America is kind of the upper middle way, you know, and looking back at my own history, in the mid 90s, I just took off and I went to live at a monastery for a while, but if you think about it, that's somewhat of a position of privilege because I had a upper middle class safety net to fall back on when I was done with that, and but if I was working for survival, that wouldn't have been an option. And so it seems like a lot of our systems um and being able to take off a week and go sit a session, I
Mm,
mean, that's, for some people that would financially ruin them,
yes.
or you have kids, and who's going to take care of my kids, or
Mhm.
I mean, like, so much of our country is one car accident away from just complete financial ruin,
Yeah.
or even a car breaking down from financial ruin, yet the the things that we value in our leaders, Buddhist leaders, are being able to put your life aside and go to sessions and do practice periods and do residential training. And as I think maybe it was the Americans and Teachers Association, or maybe Soto, I forget, but it was clear that there was like a number of hours of session you had to do to qualify or something.
Mm.
And I might be conflating different organizations or something, um, but kind of, I feel like that leaves behind, like, that kind of only allows people who are either willing to completely forego a career and family, or have some sort of privilege of birth circumstances to live that kind of life. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, if possible.
Oh yeah, it's a very, I think it's a very complex question, and so it's just good to be talking about it.
Hmm.
So resolution of it to me is like many conversations.
Hmm.
honest conversations, being able to just acknowledge. It's just helpful to just be able to talk about the privilege that comes with having a white body when you're born in the US, and not have to be like, oh, I should be ashamed of that or anything. It's just like, it's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want it to be that way. So what can we do so it is not that way? That's a big interest for me. What can we actually do? And there's lots of things, and none of them will fix it. This is why I'm glad I'm a Mahayana Buddhist. I don't have to fix things. I get to engage in liberation moment to moment. And there aren't real external objects to manipulate in the ultimate sense. There's just this opportunity to try and sort out what would be a liberative thing to do here. And so with that, to your question, yeah, I mean, the thing is, you would want Buddhist teachers to have good training. So how do we make it so people have equitable access to that training? And then also question, well, what is good training? So those are the two main sides of the question you raise. What constitutes real good training that will form an effective Buddhist teacher within any tradition? Are there rigid things that are making access inequitable based on some people having more privilege than others? And then the other side is just like, well, shoot, why don't we just be creating more and more funds where we can give money to people or make anybody have access to these practice opportunities? Those are just two small parts of the equation of building some kind of genuine equitable space. But that's just ongoing work, and to me it's relational work. So it's also play, because it's just like hearing people, talking about ideas to make changes, meeting people, learning about difference. It's beautiful. I mean, what else do you want to do with your life besides like genuinely being in relationship with reality the way it is? I don't want to do something else.
So we're about a little less than an hour into this. I know you have a time limit here. I wanted to get into the your Yogacara and your social justice stuff. Can we have a part 2 where we dive into that? So we're
Sure.
so rest or anything?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So why don't we end here? Could you talk a little bit about the best way, if someone wanted to get a hold of you, what kind of the best mechanisms for that are?
Probably just contact Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. There's just one email address there. So our beloved administrative director, Kimberly Johnson, gets all the emails and distributes them. And so, yeah, if you want to contact me, that's cool. I will be traveling all over the USA in the next year to teach from my new book, Vasubandhu's 3 Natures. And I'm really excited because the teachings that Vasubandhu puts forth are so liberative and beautiful. So hopefully I'll meet you on the road.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Take care, my friend.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.